showed you this comic is because you might have a group of children who have really good genetic dispositions to do well in the future. But if they grow up in an environment, for example, like a violent neighborhood, if you look at the picture in the window, then their genetic dispositions might not really be fulfilled. Okay, so and this is really what I'm going to talk about today. When we have the genetic factors to thrive, we also need the environment for these genetic dispositions to show themselves. Okay. So what is heredity, and what does heredity tell us and not tell us? Okay. Now, genetic factors, so our genes, let's put it simply, determine only a person's genotype, the starting point, okay? But genes do not determine how the person will end up. We may have a certain set of genes that may determine how we will appear physically, how we will behave, how well we will do in school, how well we will interact with people. But the genes alone do not determine all of that. Okay? So let me give you the definitions first and examples of the genotype and phenotype. Even though you probably have already covered these in high school or other courses in university. So the genotype is basically the genes inherited from our parents. Okay? And these genes determine characteristics like height, eye color, and many other things. I'll show you a database later that gives the genetic code for different human characteristics. Okay? Now, another characteristic of genotype is no two people have exactly the same genotype except for identical twins. So it's very, very common for researchers who want to study heredity or genotype by using identical twins in their study. Okay, to see what characteristics, what traits are common in identical twins and what varies in identical twins. Now, people who study the genotype and all the research that has been done on this does show that the genotype interacts with the environment to produce the phenotype. Now, the phenotype is the genetic expression. Okay, so we are born with this set of genes. But what is expressed, how we appear, what we do in this world, is the expression of those genes. And that's called the phenotype. The phenotype is something that is observable. You can see it, and you can measure it. Okay, so it will be things like motor abilities, intellectual skills, social behavior, personality traits. So for example, I might want to look at a person's reaction speed in a task, in a visual task, for example. I can give a task to someone on a computer to do, and all they have to do is press the computer button or the button on the mouse to react. It's something I can see, I can observe. Okay, how fast they react to something. It's something that's measurable. I can measure speed by just putting a timer linked to this button, something like that. In terms of social behavior, this kind of phenotype is observable. Why? For example, how friendly someone is can be observed. I simply watch how a friendly person versus an unfriendly person interacting with someone else. Okay? And it's measurable how? Well, I could measure how many times this person smiles at another person. This is my measure of friendliness. I could measure how many times or how long this person makes eye contact with the other person. How far does this person stand away from the other person? Proximity. So these are different ways I can measure friendliness. Okay? It's a phenotype that is observable and measurable. And the study of the phenotype, studying behavior like intellectual skills, intelligence, social skills, help us understand how genes and environment interact to influence development. Is it enough for me to inherit friendly genes from my parents? No. If I grow up in a very hostile environment, perhaps a very violent neighborhood, am I likely to be as friendly as my genes determine, or am I going to be less likely to be friendly because of the environment that I grow up in? Okay? And we'll talk more about that later on. So I'm just going to quickly give you an overview of genetic factors, understanding how genes are transmitted. You should have done this already in school, but just to give you an idea, okay, where the genes are, first of all, within each cell nucleus are chromosomes, as shown in the picture, on which genes containing the genetic code are located. Okay, so we have all heard about DNA. Chromosomes are bound by molecules of DNA. Okay, so the molecules of DNA bind, okay, they kind of stick to or are part of the chromosome. And chromosome combinations, how is it that we get genes from our mom, from our dad? Okay, not just from one person. The chromosome combinations occur during the formation of sperm and egg cells, during conception, simply put, and as a process of crossing over. Okay, basically genes exchange on homologous chromosomes. Homologous means it has two pairs of these logs. Okay, basically homologous would mean that you have these two combined together. And this, when they combine, that's where the genes are transmitted from the one parent to another. Oh, yeah. And this is already general knowledge to you. The union of sperm and ovum would lead to 23 male and 23 female chromosomes. So just to put that in a chart, okay, meiosis, where genetic transmission occurs, is a process of cell division. Okay, 23 chromosome pairs are split or halved, and the halving enables, they have to halve for you to get the 23-23. Okay, so it enables the union of the sperm and egg, and as a result, this separation allows the combination to create 46 for the new human being. So how are traits transmitted exactly? Now, the genes are located on chromosomes. Now, because chromosomes are homologous, they also come in pairs. So the genes also come in pairs. And each gene occupies a position on each half of the chromosomal pair. Now, if you have two identical paired genes, it means it's homozygous, and two different paired genes would be heterozygous. Okay? Now, it's the heterozygous combination that allows different variations. Okay? For example, there could be one type of heterozygous combination that expresses itself in terms of a dominant gene. Okay? When it's dominant, one gene will govern the outcome over another gene. So for example, the difference between people who get dimples would be 酒窝, right? Dimples versus no dimples. Simply one gene dominates another, and the ultimate expression is either or. Okay? And in the recessive case, the allele will only affect the phenotype only if it matches the allele of the partner gene. So that means a person has to inherit the same recessive allele from each parent. So for example, baldness is one kind of recessive case. That is, a person will only become bald or will start balding if the gene pair is homozygous for the recessive trait. Okay, so basically, you have to inherit the same recessive balding allele from both parents to actually be at risk for balding. The third expression would be codominance. That is, both genes affect the phenotype. Okay, one doesn't dominate the other. There's no recessive case here too. So for example, people with blood type A and blood type B combinations would simply have the blood type AB. Incomplete dominance occurs when a person with two different alleles having a phenotype that's intermediate, so in between the two alleles. So for example, the serotonin transporter gene. Anyone know what the serotonin transporter gene is for? Or what serotonin is? Has anyone heard about it? It's something to do with which disorder, which mental health problem? Depression. Okay? Serotonin transporter gene located on chromosome 17 can have alleles of different length, and the long allele has incomplete dominance over the short. Okay? Now, the inheritance of a trait can also be polygenic. That means that the inheritance of a trait whose expression is controlled by more than one gene pair. So that a particular characteristic of the human being is being controlled by more than one gene pair. Okay? It's not a one-to-one correspondence. And specific genetic patterns create a risk of developing a certain trait or diseases. There are some mental disorders, increasingly many, that show you don't just have one gene that gives you schizophrenia. You don't just have one gene that leads you to have depression or bipolar disorder. Okay? So for example, a lot of research shows now that bipolar disorder and schizophrenia are much more likely if you inherit a pattern, a genetic pattern. So it's a combination of different genes that put you at much higher risk for bipolar and schizophrenia. Okay? It's not just one gene. Now, genes also interact with each other. Okay? Very few traits are specified by single genes. Most traits do depend, as I said, in terms of polygenic inheritance, is determined by a combination. Okay? Having 20,000 to 30,000 genes per cell allows for a lot of combinations, so a lot of trait variations. Okay? And many behaviors or characteristics are influenced by multiple genes. So again, the bottom line is a gene may influence more than one trait. Many genes may influence one trait. Now, there are also genes called modifier genes. These genes affect how other genes are expressed. So let me give you an idea about what we know about different human traits that have a genetic code. Okay? Now, where can I learn more about the genetics of different behavioral traits? There's this really, really nice database called the Online Mendelian Inheritance in Man, OMIM. It's a very large, searchable, up-to-date database of human genes. So you can literally search a characteristic, a disorder, and it will give you the genetic code for it, if it has been found. Now, each record contains references. That means all the research that has been done on it, and a summary of the scientific literature. Now, so I'm giving you just a few. For example, hand skill, handedness, whether you're left-handed or right-handed, has a genetic code for that. Okay, so it is determined by genes. Hand clasping pattern. So how do you clasp your hand? Do you clasp it like this? Do you clasp it like this? This is also determined by genes. Arm folding preference. I don't even know what's the variation. How do we vary? I thought we just fold it like this. So maybe it's the other arm under the other arm. I don't know. Ears, the ability to move your ears. That is also determined by genes. Can anyone move your ears? I can't. Tongue curling, folding, or rolling. Musical perfect pitch. That also has a genetic code. A type of personality trait, novelty seeking, basically being keen to look for new things. So the adventurous type, okay, those who like to try new things, that has a genetic code. Stuttering, tobacco addiction, alcoholism, and contrary to everyone's beliefs, those who think it's a sin, it's not, because it's determined by genes. Now, homosexuality is interesting because the research, I think it started in 1996 or 7, and the latest study that the Online Mendelian, the OMIM, showed said that you have to blame the mother. The mother is the one who actually carries this variation, this gene that would put someone at a higher chance of being homosexual or being gay. Okay? So let's have a look at this. So that's the, oops. So this is what it would look like if you search something like that. Okay? And it would show all the studies that have been done. So 1991 was the first one. We're not going through all of it. I'm just giving you an idea of the kind of research and the kind of data they show you. Okay? So it's 1991 up to, and these are all different populations as well. They're trying to look for the gene to dispel myths that it's unnatural or it's not even a genetic abnormality, really. So this was the last one. Okay, Buckland and colleagues. Okay, when you see et al, E-T-A-L, it means that there were a lot of people involved in this research, and you can't put 12 people's names on it. Buckland et al. Found that the number of women with extreme skewing of X inactivation was significantly higher among mothers of homosexual men compared to mothers without homosexual sons, etc., etc. Okay, so I'm showing you where this final genetic code is coming from. All right. Any other thoughts? Questions you might have. So if you are very curious about a particular human trait, a human characteristic, just go online and search for it and see whether it has a genetic disposition. Now, why is it we inherit a certain set of genes? Some get expressed. Okay, some can be seen in the phenotype and some cannot. Now, whether or not a gene will be active depends on many factors that modify the biochemical environment inside the cell. Okay, I'm not talking about the environment, the external environment yet. So the biochemical environment inside the cell could turn specific genes on or off. So this would be, I'm trying to show you some animation. Okay, the environment just outside the cell, basically other cells could affect whether a particular gene expresses itself. It could be another gene is suppressing the expression of that particular gene. Timing as well. Some genes are active early, so some genes already express itself in childhood. Some genes, especially mental illness, don't express itself until maybe perhaps adolescence, okay, or adulthood. So the timing does matter. Oh. And then the overall environment and behavior can influence gene expression. So for example, the temperature, the weather or climate in that country. Can you give me a type of behavior that might depend on weather or climate? Or what kind of human characteristic might depend on weather or climate? Yes?
Allergy and depression.
Allergy and mood disorders like depression? Yeah? Good. And the next one is level of stimulation. This is probably the most important one. Especially when we're thinking about severe poverty or many or children coming from poor families. Okay? So basically whether the environment the person grows up in is stimulating, is engaging, okay, lots of stimuli in terms of intellectual stimuli or simply colors, the amount of colors, the amount of different shapes, versus impoverished, meaning growing up in an environment, for example, that is completely lacking of stimuli. Would affect whether or not a gene is expressed. Okay? The social world, the people you are with. For example, it has already been found, and a lot of studies, research has shown this, is that you cannot really develop language normally unless you interact with people. You have to have a social other to use language with, or else you simply don't use it normally or don't even develop it. And I will teach that when I teach you language development. Then finally, behavior. So you might have certain genes to do something, to be someone, but you have to show other kinds of behavior for that gene to be expressed. Okay, so for example, exercise triggers body changes to activate gene. I might have the genetic disposition to do well in sports, but if I don't exercise, perhaps if I don't have the right diet, that particular potential will not be expressed. Okay, so I have to have the right routine, have to right the living patterns to be able to support that. Now, the important thing between nurture-nature or nature-nurture, when we talk about nature-nurture, it means nature for gene, nurture for environment. This interaction is not unidirectional. You don't just have genes influence behavior. As I showed you just now, behavior also influences whether or not your genes are expressed. Okay? So, to put it simply, for example, the environment and experience impacts gene expression. The weather and the climate, the experience, whether or not you have been doing sports since you were young, impacts whether or not, impacts your genetic potential to do very well in sports, okay? To be very athletic. And then the other direction would be genetic factors shape what a person experiences. For example, being left-handed or right-handed, there are certain things you can do, there are certain activities you can join. But if something has been designed for right-handed people, then you might lose that experience. And this creates differences between people in a population. Okay? The experiences varies. Now, you have to know, well, what field do you call that looks a lot at heredity or genetic factors? And the field is called human behavior genetics. And this field in psychology is kind of a crossover as well. Biology, psychology addresses the question why we develop in such diverse ways. Why is it we're so different from each other? We might all have the same genetic dispositions to a certain extent, but for example, why is it we have right-handed people, left-handed people, but we're also very different in other ways? And in human behavior genetics, researchers are interested in calculating heritability factors. That is, these researchers are interested in saying how much of this type of behavior is due to heredity, is due to genes. Okay, so for example, they might say 50% of this behavior in this population. Okay, this is very important. Heritability factors are calculated for a specific population. You can't just say intelligence has a 50% heredity factor. You can't say that applies to every population in the world because it doesn't. So no one actually calculates heritability factors for the whole world population. Okay, it's specific to a population. And in this field, researchers study the relative influences. Okay, they also study, well, heredity and environment. What's the ratio that contributes to this particular behavior? And researchers, even though they are very interested in genetic factors, they do admit, they are aware of, and they acknowledge that heritability factors do vary according to the environment. Now, Michael Rutter does point out some misconceptions of behavior genetics. And he's one person who has done a lot of work on psychopathology. So he's a lot interested in mental disorders, mental health, mental illnesses. And he says one misconception is that genes limit potential. Okay, it's not true that just because you don't have the genetic potential to do very well in school, it definitely limits your potential. Okay, there are other ways to help you do well in school, just like other children or other students. And it's also a misconception that strong genetic effects means insignificant environmental influences. Just because something is strongly determined by genes doesn't mean that environment is not important for that behavior. Another misconception is that genetic influences diminish with age. Okay, that is not true. Some genetic influences do express itself more, as I showed you just now. Timing is a factor. And the final misconception, according to Rutter, is that genes regulate only static characteristics. What are static characteristics? What does static mean? Something that is stable, something that doesn't change. What kind of characteristics don't change? Your eye color. Anything else? What is it about you that doesn't really change much?
Gender.
Right, gender. Yes, quite obviously. What are the physical characteristics? Yes? A number of fingers, yes, but how about something that's, that is something that all of us have, well, most of us have, I should say. But apart from eye color, what else probably doesn't change? Your hair color, unless you deliberately change the color of your hair. So the misconception is genes regulate or have an impact on only things like eye color. The problem is actually a lot of research has found genes also regulate personality traits, for example, or other types of behavior like social behavior. Okay, so it doesn't only regulate static characteristics. This is the fun part of this class. I'm going to give you each group a picture, for example, like this. Okay? And I want you to list the traits you see. Now, don't be too worried about what traits are. Just list all the different characteristics, traits, characteristics, behaviors that you see in the picture. So, for example, like intelligence, agility meaning how well you move your body, mate preference, impulsivity. And then I want you to list the possible genetic factors of each trait. I want you to consider what do you think is biologically determined and what do you think in that picture or in that trait is determined mostly by environment, or you think they're equally important. So, for example, if I show this picture, one trait I would think about in terms of American football would be strength. It seems to me that this game really involves a lot of brute strength. And the genetic factor could be the inherited gene for physical strength. Now, the environmental factor would be, as I said just now, to do well in a particular sport. Even though you have the genetic potential, you might need the diet. Okay, I'm sure they have a particular diet that beefs them up or allows them to do this kind of wrestling style stuff. And they also need opportunities for physical training. So you might have a teenager who is interested in American football but doesn't get the opportunities to train his or her body, to do the kind of movements you need to do on the field for American football. And therefore, that genetic potential might not be expressed. Okay? So, the kind of pictures that I'm going to show you, let me quickly go through this. Will be a picture like this. No, please, the group who gets this, I'm not asking you to evaluate the dog. This is what a group asked me last semester. Oh, I thought we were supposed to talk about the dog. No, it's the woman behind. Okay? You know who he is, right? The Facebook founder, okay? All right. So this is going to be very open. I'm not restricting you to anything you see or say about the picture. And I'll come to each group and listen to what you have to say. So I focus a lot on heredity and the role of genetic factors, okay? Now let's look on the other side, the nurture part. Okay, how does the environment influence the expression of genes? And I'm going to teach you the concept of range of reaction that really explains why people are so different from each other. Okay? Basically, according to this theory or this concept, heredity does not rigidly fix behavior. It basically, your genetic disposition establishes a range of possible outcomes. Developmental outcomes meaning during human development, what the outcomes are. For example, how well you do in school, etc. So it establishes this range of possible outcomes that may occur in response to different environments. Okay? It doesn't have a straightforward relationship. Now, people with different genetic makeups have different ranges of reaction. I'll give you an example in a bit. And the range of reaction is particularly useful for understanding why is it we vary so much, especially in terms of complex behaviors. Okay? Intelligence itself is complex. So let's give you an example. We have child A, child B, and child C. Okay? And we put them in a restricted environment, basically maybe environment with very little stimulation, very little educational material, an enriched environment, a lot of books, a lot of guidance, a lot of teaching. Now, the three children's genetic dispositions or their genotype will determine how well they can perform in an enriched environment. So if you look at the restricted column, okay, all three seem to be performing within quite similar to each other. Okay, the differences are not big. But if you put them in an enriched environment, why is it child C's performance improves so much, yet child A improves only a little? It's because these three have different genotypes. Okay, the genotypes give them different ranges of reaction. How much they can improve in a different environment is determined by their genotype. Okay? So if I put it in a chart like this, just to show you that putting a child in different environments could lead to different outcomes. Now, if I put in aggression here, and we will discuss aggression in a bit. Okay, let's say I want to study aggressive trait, and I look at children in the living in violent neighborhoods, and children living in safe, so-called safe, classy neighborhoods. Oh, forgive the spelling mistake. In a violent neighborhood, you might have different outcomes. For example, children growing up to be highly aggressive, or children showing aggression in some situations when they are provoked, for example, but when they're at home, they're not aggressive. Children who are raised in safe, classy neighborhoods might show less aggression or more controlled aggression. Okay, they might have the same genotype, but the environment changes that, whether or not they express it. Or they have different genotypes that show how aggressive they can get in a very violent neighborhood. Why is it some children are so much more aggressive than others? When I show you aggression later on, I'm going to show you a clip on bullying, and I want you to tell me what you think about it. Now, an important influence on the gene-environment interaction is the developmental stage. Okay, developmental stage meaning at what time in childhood, adolescence, adulthood, okay, or infancy even, during human development is the gene-environment interaction most significant. And we call this the critical period. Okay, I'll teach you especially the critical period in acquiring language, that you must acquire language at a particular time or else you just lose the ability to use it normally. Okay, so the critical period is the stage where the impact of the environment on development is most significant. Okay, if you've passed that time, then your genetic dispositions might actually be stronger than otherwise, than the environmental effects. So one example is kids with PKU. Do you know what PKU is? Oh, okay, you know the full name. Just remember it as PKU. Okay, now kids with PKU, PKU is a genetic disorder. That's why I'm using it as an example. Now, doctors can help kids with PKU live longer, or basically avoid mental retardation and all the problems that come with PKU only if immediately after birth they are given a special diet. Now, they need to be on a special diet that's low in phenylalanin. What kind of diet is that? What does it means they cannot eat things like any meat, yeah, most meats or any meat, any dairy products, stuff with a lot of carbohydrates or starch, they can't either. Cannot eat almost everything that we can eat. But if they follow this diet immediately after birth, now if they don't do it immediately after birth, they will suffer mental retardation. So this is the critical period immediately after birth for the environmental impact diet to be effective for a child with PKU. Okay? Now, how might genetic makeup shape one's environment? And there are three ways, general ways that I'm going to give you: passive, evocative, and active. A passive impact would be, for example, parents with certain genetic predispositions creating a home environment that suits the inherited predisposition of their children. So let me give you an example. So, parents who are intelligent, well-educated, so maybe they have, how would we define well-educated parents? Let's say they have further education, so master's, PhD. That's debatable whether you can call them educated, but we'll leave it at that. Intelligent, well-educated parents, usually you would expect them to provide a home. When they decide to have a child, they would provide a home with books and very stimulating conversation. Now, there has been research to show this. Mothers who are more educated are more likely to talk to their children, provided, for example, they don't have depression, etc. So, these parents with these genetic dispositions deliberately create an environment that would facilitate their children's growth. Now, the children's inherited tendencies, that means the children who inherited the so-called intelligent traits, because they are given this environment, they also start showing their intelligence and their learning is enhanced. So this is a passive way genetic makeup can shape one's environment, the passive way. Evocative is when children's genetic dispositions create some kind of response from other people. Okay, their inherited tendencies or behaviors evoke certain responses from others. Let me give you an example. Babies with inborn tendencies, so the genetic disposition to smile often, some babies are simply more, you would say more friendly, okay, more sociable. Now, because they smile often as a result of their genetic disposition, people will respond them also in a more positive way. Okay? So their smiling often will elicit positive response and stimulation from others. When a baby smiles, when a very friendly baby smiles a lot at other people are more likely to smile back. This reinforces the baby continues to smile more. Okay? So again, showing this bidirectional influence. The third process is active. That is, the genetic makeup leads some children to seek out experiences or settings that are compatible with their inherited tendencies. So, for example, and this is called niche picking. For example, children genetically predisposed to be extroverted, they actively seek company, okay, because they have this genetic disposition to be outgoing, to be very sociable. They actively look for friends. They actively make friends with strangers or go to parties, join clubs, etc. So their extroversion is enhanced because they have deliberately participated in activities that promote this sociable behavior. Okay? So again, the three: passive, evocative, and active. Now, how might you study individual differences? That is, why is it we have genetic disposition, but why is it for other behaviors, people are so different from each other. Okay? So one way, a type of research method, is to compare adopted children with their biological and adoptive parents. So let's say your study finds that the child is more similar to the adoptive parent in a particular behavior, for example, aggression, then you might say that it's mostly due to environment because they don't have any biological relation whatsoever. If you find that an adopted child is more similar to his or her biological parent, then you would say there's a shared genetic makeup, that behavior is due more to genetic makeup than to the environment. And this has been demonstrated a lot, for example, in studies by Moffitt and Caspi. Moffitt and Caspi study antisocial behavior. Rutter, as I said, mental illness. Okay? For example, they did comparisons of biological siblings and adopted children in the same home. Now, another way you could look at individual differences or the gene-environment interaction is to compare identical twins and fraternal twins raised together in the same home. Now, if the identical twins show more resemblance on a trait or behavior than fraternal twins, then you would say there's a genetic influence. Okay, because identical twins have the same genetic makeup. Fraternal twins do not. Now, if both identical and fraternal twins show similar strength of resemblance on a trait, then you would say it's more due to the environment because those two pairs don't have the same genetic makeup. Now, the third way you can do this is to compare shared and non-shared environments, again using twin studies. Okay? Now, the idea is identical twins have more shared environments, those who have not been separated. Okay? And because they have identical genes, first of all, and identical inherited predispositions, because they have similar characters, you would also expect them to have similar treatment by parents. Although I had a student in New York who insisted that she's very different from her identical twin and that her parents treat them very differently. So there you go. There's still variation. Now, identical twins, because they have identical genetic makeup, they're more likely to be similar. Again, they also elicit similar responses from others. Okay, maybe both of them are equally friendly and they are responded in the same way, okay, because they're equally friendly. Oops. The identical twins also select more similar settings, so the active process, as I showed you just now. Okay, because they have similar genetic makeup, you do see that identical twins usually do the same things together. Okay, they usually have the same interests. So they select more similar settings, companions, activities. Okay, so the idea is that they really have a lot of shared environments, and what would be interesting would be to see, well, what would be different between these two identical twins. Okay, even though they have most of their environment and their genetic makeup, and all their genetic makeup is similar. Now, fraternal twins and siblings, because they don't have the same genetic makeup, are more likely to have separate experiences and activities. And Towers and colleagues claims that similarity is caused by shared home does decline with age. Okay, so identical twins might be very similar when they're young, but as they grow older, when there's more niche picking, okay, maybe they grow older, they become more independent, they start meeting different people. For example, if they go to different universities, they make different kinds of friends. They might start trying different things, and that's when the similarity ends. Okay, highly possible. Now, in relation to the gene-environment interaction, we want to think about the evolution of behavior. And one common question, especially relevant now considering all the horrific crimes we see on the news, etc. Why are we, on average, more aggressive now than previous generations? Okay, I want you to think about that a little bit. But before I show you that, let me show you a video clip, and I want to hear what you think in terms of genes, in terms of environment. Have any of you seen this video? Okay. Let's see. Yes? Yeah. Okay. Shh.
Well, this is getting sad, bro. You guys keep it going. Keep it going. Look at that. Who's that in the background?
I care a lot about bullying. That's why I wanted to show you this as well. So let's think about bullying. It's a very complex issue, and it certainly it brings into mind what we should discuss, especially in terms of aggression. What do you think? Yes.
I guess maybe because the environment reflects that, just like media, because many media will show the toxic, and maybe the children think, oh, it's great, it's a positive way of her.
So you're talking about media.
Yeah.
Okay. Media influence. Let me hold you there. I want you to discuss this among yourselves first, because I don't want the same people responding to me. Okay, I want you to discuss among yourselves first, because this is a complex issue. Now, let me give you a bit of background about this. For those of you who do you know the story behind this? Mm-hmm. Oh, where? Oh, okay. Casey and who? What was the name? So it became a huge piece of news in Australia. This took part in Australia. I can't remember how old they are, but the little one claims later on that Casey, I think, is a big guy, right? I think Casey is a big guy. Casey and Richard, that's it. The small one is Richard. Richard claims that Casey provoked him first. You would wonder, well, why would this little one try to pick on this big boy? But basically, Casey turned into a hero. He has his own Facebook page. He didn't create that Facebook page, but everyone who saw it basically started saying, well done, this is what you should do when you're bullied, you should fight back. Now, of course, the other side of the story is, well, it looks like he has the potential to kill someone. Because, the mother, Richard's mother is coming back to say, well, he could have easily broken my son's back. He could have been paralyzed, because that was pretty hard. So it's a very tricky issue to discuss. You would want people who have been bullied to somehow be able to fight back in a certain way. But how aggressive can you be? And is that justified, all that? Okay, I want you to think about that a bit more. And I want you to think about it in relation to the question that I asked you. Why are we, on average, more aggressive now than previous generations? Okay? All right. So let me give... Oh, the break is too soon now. Do you want to break now or discuss first then break? Discuss. Okay, fine. Let's discuss this. And please don't just sit there and not think. I want you to really think hard. Why are we on average more aggressive now than previous generations? Is it because our genes now are just more aggressive? Or what's causing this? What's causing this evolution? Or have all the generations always been aggressive? It's just now that we're expressing it. Okay, think about it.